sometimes. The strongest warrior in the room is the one no one notices. Tonight, we're going to a lonely desert base, a place surrounded by danger, where one woman proved that courage isn't measured in muscle, it's measured in fire. Her name was Corporal Elena Ramirez, quiet, focused, and more determined than anyone knew. And this is the story of how she became a legend. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the dust kicked up by the restless wind. The intel was crystal clear. The enemy was gathering, their numbers swelling just beyond the horizon. A storm was coming, and every soldier on the base felt it in their bones. They prepped their weapons, the metallic clicks and clacks of rifles being cleaned echoing through the barracks. Nervous chatter filled the spaces between the silence, a fragile attempt to ward off the inevitable. Lieutenant Davis gathered the platoon. His voice was grim as he laid out the defensive strategy, assigning sectors and fire teams. The plan was solid, but for a base this exposed, every position was critical. As he finished, a quiet voice cut through the nervous energy. "Sir." All eyes turned to Corporal Ramirez. She stood steady, her gaze unwavering, requesting the M249. A sudden silence fell over the room, quickly broken by a few stifled smirks. Whispers rippled through the ranks. One private, a young guy named Jensen, muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "She can barely carry her ruck. Now she wants the saw." The M249 squad automatic weapon wasn't just a rifle. It was a beast, a heavy belt-fed machine gun capable of laying down a devastating amount of fire. It was a weapon, usually given to the biggest guy in the squad, someone who could handle its weight and punishing recoil. Elena didn't flinch, she didn't argue or raise her voice. She simply looked the lieutenant in the eye and said one thing, her voice calm and firm. "I'm qualified." 3 words, but they held the weight of countless hours on the range, of acing every test, of knowing that weapon inside and out. Lieutenant Davis studied her for a long moment, seeing past the whispers and the stereotypes. He saw the steel in her eyes, the quiet confidence that radiated from her. He made his decision. "The M249 is yours, Corporal, get it dialed in." Elena gave a sharp nod, turned, and walked away, ignoring the disbelieving stares that followed her. She wasn't there to make friends, she was there to do a job. Night fell like a shroud, swallowing the last of the desert light. The waiting was the worst part. Then, the world exploded. The first mortar round hit with a deafening crump, shaking the very ground beneath them. Rockets screamed overhead, their fiery trails tearing through the black sky. The night erupted into a symphony of destruction and chaos. Shouts echoed everywhere as soldiers scrambled to their positions, the disciplined order of the briefing dissolving into the raw reality of combat. Through the swirling dust and confusion, Elena was a picture of focus. She dragged the heavy M249 into her designated sandbagged position, her movements economical and precise. She wasn't panicking. She was working, planting the bipod firmly in the dirt. She chambered the first round of a long ammunition belt. Her eyes scanned the darkness, locking onto the flickering shadows moving through the dunes. They were coming, fast. She didn't wait for an order. She didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. The saw roared to life, a deep guttural bark that ripped through the night. A blinding stream of tracer rounds erupted from the barrel, a solid wall of lead that scythed through the darkness. The first wave of attackers, caught in the open, was shredded through. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. She pivoted slightly, her grip firm, and suppressed another group trying to flank from the right. Then another, moving from the left. Each burst was controlled, devastatingly accurate. The M249, in her hands, wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. The battle intensified. The enemy wasn't just probing anymore. This was a full-scale assault. Mortar rounds walked across the perimeter, each explosion a seismic shock that threatened to collapse their defenses. Dust and cordite choked the air, reducing visibility to mere feet. Behind Elena, the rest of her squad took cover, returning fire with their rifles but unable to match the storm she was unleashing. The very same men who had mocked her just hours before were now hunkered down, surviving in the fortress of fire she had built around them. A quick pull of the charging handle, and the beast was hungry again. Her shoulders burned from the recoil, her hands trembled with adrenaline and exhaustion, but the fire did not stop. She became the anchor of the entire defense. A sniper team on a distant ridge tried to pick off their leaders. She silenced them with a long, sweeping burst. Machine gunners in a ravine to the east opened up, pinning down another section. She shifted her fire, and their guns fell silent. She tore apart hidden enemy nests, her tracers pointing out targets for the rest of the platoon. The M249, once an object of their ridicule, had become the very heartbeat of their survival. Then came the impact that changed everything. A mortar round scored a direct hit on the sandbag wall to her left. A massive explosion sent sand, stone, and shrapnel flying. The flank collapsed, creating a wide, terrifying breach in their defenses. Screams of wounded soldiers cut through the din of battle. A panicked voice yelled out, "Fall back! Fall back to the command post." But falling back meant abandoning the breach. It meant leaving the wounded to their fate. It meant the base would fall. Alina looked at the gaping hole, at the enemy fighters already starting to pour through it. She looked at the wounded men crying out for medics, and then she moved. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She simply stood where no one else dared. Unhooking the M249 from its fixed position, she heaved the heavy weapon into her arms and charged directly into the breach, placing herself in the open, fully exposed to a torrent of enemy fire. Bullets sliced the air around her, one tearing through the strap of her tactical vest. A piece of shrapnel from a nearby grenade blast ripped into her leg, a searing hot pain. But she stood her ground. Planting her feet in the ravaged earth, she raised the M249 and unleashed hell. For 10 minutes, it was just her. A one-woman wall against the tide. Every bullet she fired was a second bought. A second for a medic to reach a wounded soldier. A second for the platoon to rally and reorganize. A second for the base and everyone in it to survive. Sue became a silhouette of defiance, a terrifying, fire-breathing specter standing between her comrades and certain death. She fired until the barrel glowed cherry red, until her arms screamed in protest, until the last round of her last belt was spent. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The attack broke. The overwhelming continuous fire from her position had shattered their momentum and their morale. The remaining enemy fighters melted back into the desert night. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the ringing in everyone's ears. As the dust began to settle, soldiers emerged from their positions, their faces grimy, their bodies shaking with the aftermath of battle. They looked at the breach, and then they looked at Alina, who was slowly, painfully lowering the M249 to the ground. They didn't look at her with jokes or smirks. They looked at her with a raw, profound respect. With awe, Lieutenant Davis made his way over, his own face etched with exhaustion and relief. He stopped in front of her, his voice cracking. "Ramirez, you saved us. You saved all of us." Elena didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She just gave a slow, tired nod, her breath coming in ragged gasps. In the end, she didn't fight to prove them wrong. She fought because it was her duty. She fought because lives depended on her courage. And from that night on, in that small corner of the world, no one ever questioned her place behind the M249 again. Thanks for watching. If you were moved by this story of incredible courage, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of heroes who rise when it matters most.